Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream tonight. Before we start, please always read the disclaimer. We are talking about playing a computer game here. We are not talking about running trains in the real world, so please leave the real trains alone and all the installations that come with them. Hey AJ, thank you for moderating my stream. Good evening to you. I hope you're feeling well and everything is as it is supposed to be. Tonight we are doing our third stream on the Niddertalbahn since CD Radar asked us to explain every single sign. This is what we are doing, and also there was a request in the comments that we should do a video about shunting signals, and so we are doing a video about signals that are connected with shunting. For that we go back to the Niddertalbahn, and the first service that we are going to play there is one with a very special locomotive, a freight locomotive, more or less, shunting locomotive obviously. The Baureihe 363. So the first service that we are going to start is this one. The first part of a three-part service. And we will have the opportunity to have a bit of a closer look at our locomotive and then at all the signals that are in a yard and are there to protect the trains that are running through the station on the through tracks. Well, yeah, we are here in the cap. This is the cap of our Baureihe 363. Everything is blue already on the inside. You can see everything is blue on the outside as well. That is not necessarily so, but two versions of the locomotive that are in the game are blue. I really like this blue. It is a beautiful color. And it is a beautiful little shunting locomotive. You can see it has 3 axles, and the wheels are connected with coupling rods. We will have a look at what that means in a second. Before I actually want to jump into playing the service, I just want to showcase this locomotive a bit and look around the yard a bit, what we have in the yard, and yeah, explain the different things. You can see that this locomotive has this special coupling thingy attached to it, this yellow one that can be retracted and can be used actually, and this is for automatically coupling to vehicles. You would only use this when you're shunting, not when you're actually running a train on the line. For that you can always use the normal coupling equipment like the Schraubenkupplung that this locomotive has as well. But for shunting purposes, those automatic couplings are actually much more convenient. So before we set up this locomotive, I just wanted to talk about where those numbers come from. I have said this is a Baureihe. Where did the presentation go? Here. It is a Baureihe 363, but what does that mean? No, what we just saw was the Baureihe 365, but we know that there is a locomotive that looks almost similar in the Dresden Nahverkehr, where it is a 363, not a 365. And there is also a standalone loco DLC that has been issued a couple of years ago. That is the Baureihe 363, not in blue, but in red at this time. And how does that fit together? Which of them is the new ones? Which of them is the old ones? Sometimes you can read that this is a V60, and I just wanted to clarify what those numbers actually mean and what the numbering is supposed to tell us. These locomotives are actually quite old. They came into service around 1956. As always, the numbers that I'm giving you for the years, they are not super exact because it always takes some time to get the first specimens of a locomotive running or of a system, and then it takes some time until it actually well, is so widespread that you can say they entered service properly. In 1956 already they had two versions of this locomotive. That was called a V60 at the time. The V stands for Verbrennungslokomotive, I guess, in the old German nomenclature, meaning a combustion engine as opposed to an electric engine. So it is a diesel locomotive. We have a diesel engine on it and providing our own power. We are not getting the power in through an overhead catenary. We have no pantograph, but just like the old diesel electric locomotives in Zampatch grade, we are getting our own power from a diesel engine. And there have been two versions from the start, a light version and a heavier version. Why did we need a heavier version? Because a heavier locomotive is needed if you want to haul heavier freight cars, obviously. For that, already almost at the beginning, there were two versions in existence, a lighter one and a heavier one, and the number was the same. It was a V60. In 1968 there was a reclassification, and that was the point in time when all the German locomotives got more or less the numbers that they have now, or the numbers according to the system that they are still using now. And the light version was numbered a Baureihe 260, and the heavy version was numbered a Baureihe 261 at the time. You can see it had a 2 at the beginnings, like the regular big diesel locomotives in Germany. So the system is like the electric locomotives typically have a 3-digit number starting with a 1, like the 110 in the Dresden-Oldenburg, up until the 193, where is the Siemens Vectron, for example, and 164.2 or the 185 for the trucks, 2 locomotives. All the electrics have the 1, all the diesels have the 2, and why do we have a 3? This is because in 1987 our locomotive here was reclassified as a small locomotive, a Kleinlok, and Kleinloks have the 3 at the beginning. And what was the idea about that? It was actually cheaper to run them as a small locomotive, because at the time at least you could use a driver with a lesser driving license, and obviously with lower salary then, and so it was easier to reclassify this locomotive as a Kleinlok and give it the number 3, although according to the specifications it was still okay to run it as a regular big diesel engine with a 2 at the front. At the time it was cheaper to run it as a small locomotive and use the less qualified staff on it. This has changed since then, so it does not really make a difference anymore, but the classification remained. It is still a small locomotive with the 3 at the beginning. And yeah, the numbers, the second and the third digits stayed the same, so it was the 360 and the 361. And then more or less about at this time they built into this locomotive a radio remote control, what actually enabled the driver to get off the locomotive, walk to the end of the train, and remote control his engine with no one on the locomotive, and not needing a second person for reversing the train, for example. And you can see that in the game, this remote control that was installed then. It is sitting here. Here, this is the remote control. This is the unit that you can take with you and remote control the locomotive from the outside. This is the charging apparatus for it. Obviously in the game you cannot take it away, but at least you can see it. This remote control thing would be a great thing if you actually were able to get off the train, take this with you and remote control the locomotive from the outside, but obviously also a big thing to implement. At least you can see that it has this remote control thingy here, and the locomotives that got this additional radio remote control got a new number as well. The light versions of them were classified as a 364, and the heavier version of that were classified as 365. And this is blue in my presentation here because it is blue in the game. This is the 365 that came into existence in the game with the Niddertalbahn DLC, and this is the one that we're sitting on at the moment. But the development did not stand there. In 1997, those engines got a new diesel engine. They were using, I think, Maybach or Mercedes-Benz or something of that family engines. Until then, and in 1997, they got, or some of them got, a better engine, a Caterpillar engine, and those are the numbers 362 for the light version and 363 with the heavier version, and this is the one that we have in the Dresden Nahverkehr DLC and in the Taranta Rampe, and in the red version in the standalone DLC. So the ones that I colored here in my schematic are in the game, the 365 and the 363. Since the Niddertalbahn DLC is set in 1992, I think, it is obviously before the 363 came into existence, so it needed to be the 365. When you're sitting in the cab, the most well, the first thing for me, at least, to see whether you're sitting in a 365 or 363 is the Indusi / PZB apparatus, because on the 365 you still have this very old Indusi control with the only two lights, a yellow one and a blue one, and on the 363, at least in the game, you have those PZB indicators that you know from a lot of other trains as well. Let's just have a look at the locomotive in the game so you can see that. Yeah. Oops. This is where I wanted to end up. So here in the middle you can see it. This thing where you turn it on more or less looks the same on both locomotives. You have to remove the plastic cover and then you can switch the main switch for the Indusi here. What is the name of the PZB before it actually was named PZB. And if you turn it on, the blue light turns on and the yellow lamp is more or less your 1000 Hertz lamp that you know from our regular PZB indicators. What PZB program is actually running on the locomotives here needs some further testing, because the PZB 90 program that we have on all the modern trains in the German DLCs was not introduced in 1992, at least not on those locomotives. Actually, they were using a program that is called I60 for Indusi 60. We had a couple of different values for the 1000 Hertz and the 500 Hertz monitoring, and it worked not with a microprocessor but actually with relays switching in the machine. And from what you can read on the internet, those locomotives were not actually updated to PZB 90, at least from what you can read at some sources in the internet. They got a very special program, an I60M, and in Indusi 60M, what was also modified, a modified version of the I60, so this is quite special. I have not actually tried if that is simulated properly in the game. On our locomotive here, we cannot have the i60M program because it was introduced in the middle of the 90s. So in 1992 we cannot have this i60M. So I guess what we have on our locomotive here in the game should be an i60 program. We cannot really test it because the general speed limit on the Niddertalbahn is so low that you cannot really know if the different thresholds are implemented correctly. So just to see where all those numbers come together and how to distinguish those two locomotives that we have in the game, the 365, the older version, even if the number is higher, and the newer version, the 363. What do we need to know about this locomotive? There are some special controls and some special indicators that we should know a little bit about so that we can use this locomotive properly in the game. And for that, I tried to model this locomotive here in PowerPoint so that I can well indicate some things. We have seen it is a locomotive that does not have multiple trucks or bogies, but only 3 axles, and all of them are powered, but in a bit of a special way, a way that more or less reminds you of steam engines. So we have seen we have 2 hoods, one long, one short. The long one is the one at the front, and there is our prime mover, the diesel engine, where the power comes from. And from there it goes into a transmission, and this is a locomotive that has a hydraulic transmission. That is why it is called a diesel hydraulic transmission. Most of the engines that we have in the game that run on diesel anyway, they have a diesel electric locomotives. This is what we know from sandpatch grade prime mover, and then an alternator or a generator. We have electric current, and then traction motors that are powered with this electric current. Not so on this locomotive here. Here we have a turning shaft that comes from the diesel engine, and it goes into a transmission that is called a hydrodynamic transmission. What that actually is, I think we will have a separate video about this, how a hydrodynamic transmission works. It works without electricity, but with, as the name indicates, with the flow of a liquid, an oil, in this machine to solve the most basic question in railroading, how you can have at the beginning high torque, less rotations, and as you're going faster, lower torque and higher rotations, and how this is done in a diesel hydraulic locomotive in a hydrodynamic transmission. I should think we have a special video about it. So this hydrodynamic transmission, you don't find it only you do not only find it on this locomotive. A couple of shunter locomotives in Germany have it. The 204 should have a hydrodynamic transmission, and the G6, even though it is a very modern locomotive, has a hydrodynamic transmission. And I think we should look at this locomotive and find out how a hydrodynamic transmission works. The 612, the tilting train from the Tarantarampe, by the way, also has a hydrodynamic transmission. So it returns in a couple of very different vehicles, and it is a very interesting technology, and we should have a special video about this. Here we have this hydrodynamic transmission, and after that there is a mechanical transmission switched behind this hydrodynamic transmission. What does this mechanical transmission do? The one thing is the reversing, deciding which way the wheels are supposed to turn, forward or backwards. And also we have a very big gear lever in the game, like this one here, gear selector, it is set to long distance at the moment, and it can be set to shunting. So this is actually a 2-gear mechanical gearbox that is in the train of power behind the diesel hydraulic transmission. So whatever comes out of this hydrodynamic transmission is also transmissed through this mechanical transmission, so that you can have higher rotations, less torque if you switch it to long distance, and a higher torque and lower rotations if you switch it to shunting, depending on whether you want to actually run this train on a track or whether you want to move heavy freight cars around. So this is something that you need to know, why this, what this big lever is actually for. Yeah, you can see it, the reverser and the gear lever actually attack here on this mechanical transmission. And you can find it here in your locomotive. How does it go on? How do we get the power from the engine to the wheels? Like this, from the transmission there is a shaft, and this shaft turns another shaft, a check shaft. This is like in Blindwelle, it is called in German, a check shaft. It is turning in the same orientations as the axles are turning, but it is a shaft that does not have a wheel attached to it. This is, I think, the reason why it is called a Blindwelle, a blind shaft in German, and it is, well, a special part of mechanical construction in this locomotive. This one is turning, and it has a flywheel attached to it, jack shaft, flywheel, and this flywheel is supposed to even out small changes in speed of rotations, because it has this asymmetrical layout with more mass outside of the center. So this makes sure that the jack shaft is running evenly, and the flywheel is connected with a couple of coupling rods, Kuppelstangen, to the wheels. So transmission turns the jack shaft turns the flywheel, flywheel turns the wheels by means of the coupling rod, and then the wheels are turning and we're getting the power on the wheels. How do we control this? We have already seen our command stand with the controls. We especially have our throttle. We can increase or decrease the power. In the beginning, there was a big wheel where you could actually control how much fuel was thrown into the diesel engine. The more fuel that is thrown into the diesel engine, the more power comes out of it. Since the introduction of the radio remote control system, we have a computer switched between the throttle and the diesel engine. So with what we have in our locomotive now, no longer the big wheel to control how much that was here. It more or less looked like the handbrake wheel, but on the side of the command stand, and by turning the wheel to one side, you could increase the amount of fuel that was sent to the engine or lower it by turning it the other way around. And now, since we have the remote control installed, we have a computer that you cannot see, and when we are not using the remote control, we are, well, controlling this computer by means of a joystick. And this is why this looks so modern on this very old locomotive, why we have this modern joystick control, and not the old vintage wheel on this locomotive. Yeah, because with this throttle joystick, we are controlling the computer the same way we would control it with the remote control. And we can see where the, yeah, back to the presentation, and we can see how much fuel the computer wants the engine to have by looking at an indicator that shows us the Steuerdruck, because the communication between the control computer and the diesel engine is done by changing the pressure in a pneumatic system. So the higher the pressure, the more fuel goes into the engine, and the pressure from this system, we can read it on this indicator here. So let's have a look at this as well. A lot of indicators here. Steuerungsluftdruck, control air pressure, and we will see it later. Now at the moment we won't see it because it is switched off still. Maybe we can, by moving the main switch, change over button, and then if we actually, you can see it, if I increase the throttle, then the pressure here good thing that this is not real, because since I did not release the brakes, the engine's almost broke, but for a short moment you could see how the pressure in this system increased. Oh, CD Radar, thank you for being on the stream tonight. Well, you missed a bit of my reminiscences about the 365, but I think you will get into it, no problem. So what we just did was a little experiment how you can see when increasing the throttle, the control air pressure in this system here gets increased, and even if you have all the hot elements turned off by increasing and decreasing the throttle, you can see how much fuel the computer allows the engine to get. And this is this manometer that shows us this figure. We have already seen the radio remote control that can, if it is activated, control the control computer just the same way as we do it with our joystick, but then with the radio remote control via radio. And then you can remote control this little locomotive even if there is nobody on the locomotive actually. In case that the control computer malfunctions or gets broken, there is or is supposed to be an emergency valve that allows you to control the amount of fuel that is sent to the diesel engine. I think, or I'm not entirely sure at this point, you can find this control here. In the game it is called a fine control valve. You can set it from 0 to 100. I don't know if it actually does anything. I am not sure if this is the auxiliary or emergency control in case that your computer malfunctions. It is here. Maybe if you know if that is this control or if it serves a different function, then let me know in the comments. Would be interesting to know. Maybe there is some hidden switch that activates this fine control. It says fine control valve. Maybe you can actually use it to fine control the amount of fuel sent to the engine. But I don't know. If you have intel that I don't have at this point, don't hesitate to put us wise. One word is, as you have seen, you don't have notches like on the American diesel electric locomotives that you have on sandpatch grade for controlling how fast your diesel engine is supposed to run, but it can be done in very little increments. I don't do it again to not ruin it, but you can do it almost without increments in between. So that is that. We know how the power from the diesel engine through the transmissions, the hydrodynamic first, then the mechanical transmissions, then the jackshaft, the flywheel and the coupling rod gets to the wheels so that our locomotive can run. We can read this Steuerungs-Luftdrucks-Indicator, and we know why this old locomotive has a modern thing like a joystick on board. So now let's actually drive this a bit. Let's restart it. And let's see what we encounter on this little baby. I only will start this service a bit to see the animated derail that we have here. How do we set up this thing? To turn on the Sifa, you have to be very savvy, because it is this little switch that you can find here in this row of circuit breakers. This is where you turn on the Sifa. Am I not standing? Here. This is where you turn on the Indusi or PZB. Main switch is the only thing that works here. Don't forget to remove the plastic cover. Now I try to sit back. And then to activate your command stand, main circuit breaker. Now we need some lights. At the front we always should turn on all 3 lights to have the 3 lights at the front of the train. The back end, it is typically enough to have 1 light on. Because we don't have any red tail lights, I always like to switch on the instrument lights. We have a locomotive brake. That is a direct brake that only works on the locomotive. Obviously we have a train brake. That is a manually lapping multiple release brake valve. Let's give it some brake here. To use this throttle joystick and not the one on the other side, you always have to press this button, then it lights up, and you know now this joystick is activated. Then you can use this thing to set the direction of travel, and you have those lights here lighting up so that you can see what your reverser is set to. Then we can release the brakes and apply some throttle. You can see the Steuerungsluftdruck increases and we are moving. One word about us running to a switch from this direction, where you can see that this switch is set actually to the other direction. So we're coming in through a direction that the switch is not set to. Typically this would not necessarily be a problem, but in the game sometimes it is, especially when starting a scenario or a service. Sometimes you can derail because of that. So, this is where we are supposed to stop. Then we are most probably supposed to go into the other direction. We can send Hank, our conductor, out to set the switches. We will be required to go that way. And before we do that, I wanted to point out one very nice thingy. What is an animated derail? You can see here, we have this yellow thing on the track that has the purpose to derail any train running across it. Why would we want to do it? To prevent the train from running out into a line. And you can see it is at the moment on the track, so it would derail us if we went across it. And so we know that there is a derail that can kick us out of the track. We have this little indicator box here, and if you see that sign, you can see it is a SHO that we have seen in different contexts as well, preventing you from going that way, and for a reason, because this derail here would derail the train and cause a lot of damage. What happens if you are actually supposed to pass this point? This yellow part can be swapped away. So let's try if we can actually. At the moment we have no route available. Okay. Can see in the background our little locomotive. And now you could see it. It is actually animated. This yellow thingy was swapped away, and at the same time the signal here changed and now showing in SH1, and we can pass this part of the track without getting derailed. That was what I wanted to demonstrate on this service here. There are derails of that kind on other parts of this DLC where they are not animated for whatever reason. But this one is. And I was very happy to see that. Okay. No, not the journey. To the trains. Choose the route, Niddertalbahn scenarios. I wanted to play this 373 Sugar Beets scenario with you. What is a really cool scenario? We have not only to move some freight, but also to move passenger train that has stuck there. Yeah, lots of fun, yeah, you name it. With some interesting questions about the signaling that is going on there. We will have a second part of a presentation where we look at those signals and on all the switch indicators. So, setting up our train, turn on the Sifa, turn on the Indusi, not forgetting to close the cover again, main circuit switch, lighting, always a nice thing to move the wipers out of the way so that you can see better, activate your side, activate it. Set the direction of travel to backwards, and then send Hank to set the switch, especially in the beginning. When we're talking about switches, we will talk about switches later on a bit more. It is always, and the most important question about switches is always from what side you are coming. Typically, if you have a switch like this, you can come from this end, so you won't be switched. You're actually converging with the other track, and then you're running through this thingy here. This is called in German the Herzstück, the core piece of the switch. In English you would probably call it a frog or a toad or a simple crossing. That's what I have read here. So this is the part where actually the tracks are welded together, and the flanges of the wheels have to pass through, and for a little gap they have to cross this little gap without being guided by the rails. For that you have the guiding rails on this end to prevent the flanges to go too far into the other direction and hit this part then too hard. So for all the indicator stuff that we will talk about later, when you're coming from this side, you're not facing the points, you're coming through the, or from across the frog into the switch. From the other end, like when you're approaching the switch like this, then you're facing the points being those thin parts of track that can be moved to the left and to the right to actually switch or throw the switch and determine the way that the train is supposed to go. Yeah, so this is facing the points, von der weichen Spitze her in German, and this is not facing the points. And typically when you're not facing the points but coming across the frog and the switch is set to the opposite direction, then you can, with most switches, just run across it, and then the points will align according to the flanges of your wheels. But here, if you want, well, I don't show it, you probably will find out yourself. If you do that here in this scenario and don't set the switch at first to the correct alignment here, then you will get derailed here. So send out Hank to set the switch to straight through so that we can go and pick up those wagons on the other end. CD Radar asked, what is the difference between Indusi and PZB? It is a historical thing. It started out being Indusi, induktive Zugsicherung, I think is the word for it, and that was in 1934 until the 90s, and in the 90s, with more and more revolved or evolved programs, it was renamed PZB, punktuelle Zugbeeinflussung. So it is more or less the same system in different stages of evolution, and it got the new name in the 90s, and since then it is PZB. But in a lot of sources you just find it as synonyms in Indusi and PZB. Older people working for the railways are still talking about PZB as Indusi, especially on older vehicles. So let's pick up those cars. We release the brakes, apply some power. We are not using our automatic coupling rod because we are not shunting with them, but we are taking them on the line. When you're coupling with this locomotive to cars, not using the automatic coupler, and you're always prone a bit to get bounced. If you don't power brake a bit. So that wasn't the smoothest of putting the locomotive at the cars. But actually, if you want to use those Schraubenkupplungen here, those screw couplings, then you have to press the locomotive against the cars a bit so that the puffers are close together enough. I think this is what they call aufdrücken, to press upon in German. So now that we have coupled, we're going out on the line. For that we reverse the direction. You can see on this light has changed. Now this light is on and indicating that we are going this way. You might have noticed that this signal here that can show SH0 and SH1 has switched from SH0 to SH1, allowing us to pass. So this is a Sperrisignal that makes sure that no train is coming from the siding into the main line without permission. The SH1 can also be found here on this buffer block. We will get to that also in the presentation. If the signal here is showing in SH1. Then from the back end, you can see it as only one white disk. If it is showing the SH0, it is showing two disks. Let's see if we can find a signal of that kind that shows SH0. No, probably there is none. We're here in Altenberg, right? Anyway, we will see enough of them later. Can release the brakes and apply some power. For the brakes we have the indicator here for the brake pipe. Hauptluftleitung is the brake pipe, typically at about 5 bars. Did we set the switch, by the way? We didn't. No, we did. Well, don't try this at home. Always throw the switch before driving over it, not while driving over it, obviously. Brake pipe, 5 bars. If you apply the brakes, then the pressure here gets lower, so you can always see how much of your train brake is applied. The smaller gauge showing the brake cylinder pressure, and it can show a reading if you apply the train brake or the direct brake, the independent brake that only works on the locomotive. Here is our speedometer. This is the tachometer, where you can see the rotations per minute that your prime mover is doing. This is for the brake system, the main reservoir, something between 9 and 10 bars. Those on the left are not so important, they are for the battery, whether it is charging and the voltage from the battery. Here is temperature for the transmission oil and for the cooling water. Typically not a problem here in the simulation. When we have switched our mechanical gear to long distance, then we are allowed to go 60 max, Streckengang 60. This is what our speed clock can do. Even if we can go 60 here, we always need to be cautious with accelerating. If you are doing more than 1200 rotations per minute, then our engine tends to show a behavior where you can lose power quite fast. Don't know what actually happens then in our engine, or whether the wheels are slipping. But at any rate, you can't accelerate anymore. So it's always advisable to increase the power carefully. And not go beyond the 1200 or 1300 if it can be helped. Or at least not too early. Unlike other locomotives, you don't have a traction effort meter. So you have more or less to guess from the tachometer and the sound that the engine makes whether you can apply more power without losing traction. If the sound of the engine gets too high, then this is a warning that there will be this sort of traction loss quite soon. Now we're going downhill anyway, so I take away the power, let the train coast. And we can use our train brake a bit. It is a manually lapping brake. That means we have a lap position. If we move it into service application, brake force is added, so the pressure in the brake pipe is lowered. If we move it back to lap, then we freeze the setting in the brake pipe. If we want to restore the pressure in the brake pipe, we have to move the lever to release. And then at the same time we drain the brake cylinders. So those are the settings for the brakes. Release running, this is the typical setting that we have when we are on our way. That allows the brake pipe to be filled up to its regular value and the brake cylinders to drain. The next setting, neutral, would allow the brake pipe to fill again, but the pressure in the brake cylinders is still kept on. Lap position freezes the pressure in the brake pipe and the pressure in the cylinders. Service application lowers the brake pipe pressure, freezes the pressure in the brake cylinders. And if you want to release the pressure in the brake cylinders, you have to move it back into running release. That is a manually lapping brake lever, as opposed to an automatically lapping brake valve, where you just, if you want a bit of brakes, you move your lever into the initial application or minimal application setting, and if you want a bit more brakes, you move it a bit further along, and if you want even more brakes, you move the lever more until you get to full application at the other end. I actually like those manually lapping brake levers. Takes a bit to get used to it, but I enjoy them a lot. Sifa-Indicator, by the way, are those two lamps here. They light up. Then you have to press your Sifa button. Where is it? Where is it supposed to be? In the model. Somewhere I've seen it. I'm always using my key. Well, I'll find it later maybe. When we're approaching to Heldenbergen-Windecken, we can see the Indusi control in action. At the moment it is only showing the blue light, indicating that it is active at all. As soon as we hit our Wachsamkeitstaste, our vigilance key, after passing an active 1000 Hz, we will get the yellow lamp on steadily, showing us that 1000 Hertz monitoring is active. Hello, Lincoln 257. Nice to have you on the stream. So this is the part, you might remember it from the other scenario that we played the other day, where the tree fell. Today there is no tree falling, and we can proceed. If you want to know more about why I am using my horn here. Do you speak English? I understand a little. Well, yeah, I'm trying to speak English. Game is really laggy on stream. I'm sorry to hear that. Now we are approaching a VR2 signal, distance signal warning us about an incoming speed reduction to 40. We have to acknowledge this with the vigilance key. But now it is actually laggy not only on stream, but also in real life. Why is it going so laggy now? Well, we have to reduce our speed to 40 until we hit the next signal, showing in HP2 according to what was announced. What you can see is that the yellow lamp turned on, the yellow Indusi lamp. Where is the ICE? Hello Ronnie, nice to have you on the stream. Ice is in my drink. Well, I think with the ICE we can have the tip of the train at one station and the end on the next on this route here. HP2, we're down to 40 at this point, and we're getting in VR0 warning us about a red signal on the next main. Bye bye. I really wish they add the ICE 4 on the game. Oh, we will see. But before we run the ICE, they butcher it more than they did the ICE 1. Well, today we are running a little locomotive from the 50s, from the 1950s. Don't know what the ratio between the power that this locomotive has and the ICE is. $403 screens. Well, I'm afraid we won't get the 403 screens in the model. So, what is our scenario telling us? We have been informed that on the line ahead a BR628 has broken down. We have been asked to approach it and push it into the next station. Okay, so we are supposed to go into the next track, although we know that it is occupied by a broken down passenger train. You can see we are approaching a red signal, an HP 0, with 2 red lamps on. So I would say, even though the scenario tells us to go ahead and couple, I cannot really pass the signal here. We have learned about a lot of additional signals that can actually allow us to pass a red signal, but searching for them, we can see neither. We can't see an SH1 that would allow us to pass this signal as a shunting service. We can't see a Vorsichtsignal. We cannot see an Ersatzsignal, no white flashing lamp, no 3 yellow lights in the form of a V. What do? We contact our signaler and ask them, can we go? And the signaler says, proceed as restricted speed, pass the red signal. And say, okay, if the signaler says so. I still have a problem with this. Somewhere I learned I may only pass a red signal of that kind if I have a written order. And what you just told me on the radio is not a written order. Even if I use this, what is a telephone box, to contact the signaler, he cannot give me a written order. You can see there is the possibility to show the SH1. Yeah, a Befehl. I would need a Befehl. Okay, maybe they sent someone with a Befehl. Ah, here is the guy coming with the Befehl. Thank you for giving me the Befehl. Let's imagine he gave us a written order to pass it. And now we're good, I think. We have the written order. We check that it is for us and for this line. And then we put it somewhere safe. So in case something goes wrong, we can say, well, we got our written order. And then we pass the red signal. Can see it takes a while to release the brakes. What is really nice, the brakes are animated. You can see the brake shoes here, and you can see them move away from the wheels. And this not only on the locomotive, but also on the cars. So that is a nice bit of animation and simulation here. So, you can see we are passing a red signal without any additional signal because we got a written order. And we have to press our Befehls key so that the Indusi does not stop us. So we can pass the active 2000 Hz on this signal. And then we can go out in the line until we meet the broken down vehicles. Those signs tell us we cannot pass here if we have our pantograph up. Since we don't have a pantograph at all, we don't need to worry about them. So what would we do in a situation like this? How fast can we go if we expect a broken down train in this piece of track that we just entered passing a red signal? I think on sight is the fastest that we can go. Here you can see an end of shunt or end of shunt limit board, Halt für Rangierfahrten. If you are only a shunting service, you may not pass this sign. you need permission to be at Zugfahrt to proceed. So how fast is restricted speed in Germany? Well, you can't really tell. It's not like in the American systems where you have a defined value for restricted speed. Obviously not faster than a speed that allows you to stop within the part of track that you can actually see, in case that there is an obstacle. But probably not faster than 40, because that is the value that allows the Befehl 40 Verfahren. Although I have read that the 363, the newer versions of this locomotive here since the middle of the 90s, have the i60M Indusi program running that allows them to go 60 in a Befehl 40 situation. But I could not find out why they can actually go faster there. And I wonder why my game is like, it's not that you can't go faster, it's that you're not allowed. Yeah. But do you know why the i60M allows you to go faster in a Befehl 40 situation than the 40 on the PZB 90 regime? Yeah, while pressing it. I've read somewhere, typically on the Befehl 40, you are restricted to 40 when pressing it down and passing the red signal. And in Indusi 60M program, you supposedly are allowed and able to go 60 before the system stops you while pressing down the Befehlstaste. What is on this locomotive obviously not that interesting, because the faster that it is allowed to go is 60 at best anyway. So we are approaching our broken down train. Okay. So the Indusi would allow to go 60, but we are only allowed to go 40 because the order says so. Makes sense. Makes sense. End of discussion. So we are approaching our broken down passenger train. I think it is just around this bend. It is on some kind of little bridge, if I remember correctly. Yeah, but obviously this is always a difficult situation when you are allowed to enter a piece of track where you know that there is a train or another vehicle sitting around. Since we are supposed to couple up to a passenger vehicle, I think we have to stop in front of it before we actually couple up. Even though probably the passengers have already left this train. And here it is, we can see it. Sitting directly on the bridge. And we have to stop our Sugar Beet train. Here this boof branch is clipping through our cap. So what would we do in real life now when we are approaching here? Try to get contact and talk to the driver of this broken down train. Tell him we're here, we're good to couple. Make sure everyone in this train does not kicked out of their seats when we're coupling to it now. Okay. And then Hank can go out and couple. I really want to know why my game is so laggy today. What did I do to insult the gamer god? Yeah, obviously, what I would do now here, the game does not really ask you to do it, but I wouldn't push this train around with anyone sitting in the front end here with a radio to tell me what is going on at the front. So I want to simulate it like this, sitting Hank in the front end, telling me track is clear. The nice thing is that we can see the speedometer of this train, so that even with this view here we can see how fast we are going. Ronnie, one question. How would you set up your PZB equipment in a situation like this? Would you turn on the PZB stuff on this train that is pushed around, or on my locomotive here? Because obviously I can hit the magnets at the point when the train has already passed it. The one in front, I mean. In the game I think it is turned off completely. The PZB is not working anymore here. Or the Indusi. Problem is, if you're using the PZB equipment of the train in front, you can't hear the alarms and you can't push the buttons from the locomotive that you're driving. So now we're approaching and VR2, warning us about an incoming speed reduction to 40. Here is the 1000 Hertz magnet. You'd never do it like this. You'd leave your usual wagons at the siding and pull them. Okay, thanks a lot. That eases my mind a lot. So you would not bring home a broken down passenger train and your Sugar Beets at the same time. So this is purely fictitious. Good to know. Here comes the HP2 with the reduction to 40. In the speed diagram, by the way, there is a part of the track where you're allowed to go 1000 kilometers per hour. This is where we get this strange line here. I guess because it is fun. It is an out-of-the-box scenario. But I'd appreciate it if they ordered you to leave the wagon somewhere and then at least you can see in this setup how the signal switched to HP 0. CD Radar says, when I was in driver's course, we tried driving the train from the opposite cab with instructions over the radio. It was quite fun on the test track. I don't want to experience that in service though. Alright. I can see that. Especially here in a tunnel, right? You don't know what is happening on the other end. Maybe we should slow down a little. And the game is laggy. How come the game is so laggy now? Fahrtanzeiger is not on. And careful when you're playing this scenario and want to go very close to the stop marker that is given there for the scenario. Because you spat out as soon as the tip of your train here passes this NE5 stop marker that we can just see approaching. And I think that this stop marker is just at the 1 meter mark. So if you overshoot just a little, you spat out. Let's hope we don't. And this with our manually lapping brake valve. Now we're supposed to uncouple our 628. Okay, Hank, please do that. And we're supposed to go back with our Sugar Beets, passing this HP0 signal at the end. Now that we have dropped off the 628 here, let's run around and get the other cut of cars, or K, then we get the other cut of cars. So we have to reverse back. I already set the reverser to the other end, release the brakes and go that way. And now Hank needs to be on the end of the train again. What's the problem? Why am I not getting any power? Oh, brakes weren't released yet. So in the American videos you always can see the conductors riding at the end of the train. I've never seen that in Germany. So not in the wagon. Well, I think he has to stand here. But that is a bit flimsy, isn't it? They don't have those letters on this car. So, dispatcher, don't you want to switch the signal to a more favorable aspect so that we can actually pass it? He allows us to pass it. Again, not without a written order. It is clearly showing HP0, so we should not pass this signal, not even with the end of our Sugar Beets. But the scenario wants us to, and we're not spatting out. This scenario is real driver's nightmare. Yeah. Good thing that it is not real. What we are doing here. But I have to admit it is fun in its out-of-the-way style. The whole Sperrfahrt, and when you need a written order ordeal. If you want. Okay. Yeah. We should have a written order for that, and everyone else in the Bundesland is supposed to not move their train. Okay, now we'll go to the different the other direction again. Hank has to sit in the tunnel. Well, now we can see it from the front. No, that is not a good camera view. Let's take this one. Switch indicator is telling us we are going to the left. Now the signal is not bothering us because it is for the opposite direction. At least what we can see is that they turned on the Fahrtanzeiger here. So what that we know, oh yeah, the dispatcher has consented that we go there. We're passing our 628. And the Fahrtanzeiger typically informs you that the exit signal has been set to a proceed aspect. At least this is what the rules tell me. But unfortunately, the dispatcher did not set the exit signal to a proceed aspect, but it is still showing HP 0. And again, we can pass it without spatting out. Even without hitting our Befehl 40 key here. See? Just pass it. So I think they should have set those signals to HP 1. They want us to proceed there. Or given us a written order. Now we're approaching the limit. Oh! I went into emergency. Well, at least that stopped the train. And we can go back to pick up the second cut. Of course! Hank, are you still in the Sugar Beets? Yes, good. Then you can pay attention. We already switched the reverser. We are releasing the brakes. Now we're actually a bit confused what the signals are, what the switches are. Always talk to the signaler, to the dispatcher. Are we allowed to go? Proceed as at restricted speed. Very good. Ronnie says, I honestly admire people who work for cargo or these Nebenbahn companies. I enjoy my ICEs way too much, lol. Yeah, I can understand that. Look at this interesting switch indicator showing us that we're going to the left. It only happens on Außenbogenweichen, outer curved switches. But I think it should not show it if you're coming from a direction where you're facing the points. Only from the other end. But we will talk about this later in the presentation. Well, Hank should not sit in the car, but he's enjoying sitting in the Sugar Beets too much. So, since those cars are no passenger cars, we probably do not need to stop before coupling up. But obviously, we can't run into them too fast. Okay. Hank, please couple the cars. Then you can come back into the loco. Very good. Headquarters have asked to bring the failed train to Bad Vilbel, where it will be hauled to Frankfurt for its repair. Let's couple it again. Okay, so we have to put the broken down 628 to the end of our train. Again, signaler, are we good to go? Proceed as signals indicate. Good. Hand should tell the distance between cars. Yeah, he should, but he never does. I've told him a couple of times. No, Hank is great. Let's suppose he's doing that. Well, he's wearing those special spy goggles that makes us look through his eyes. That is as good as telling us the distance between cars. You can see the Sperrisignal there showing SH1. We are good to leave the siding and go out into the main road or in the main track. At least until we get to the end of Shunt sign. I think we will have to pass the exit signal once more when it is showing HP 0. But I have to admit, this is really creepy to pass so many red signals. Good signaler who tells that you need to act as signals indicates, but do not tell us what signal it is that you cannot see. Well, somewhere I have read that even if the signaler tells you that a signal is at a certain aspect, you are not allowed to rely on that completely, but you have to go on site until you see the signal for yourself, at least in some situations. What is not the worst thing, actually. We've all seen what happens if you allow the signalers to send trains past red signals on spoken order alone. In Greece this year. So just let's be happy that we need this written order. Okay. Backwards again. Hank, are you here? Well, why did you come to the locomotive? We need you once more on the last car. Okay. Again. Signaler, can we go? Set your switches accordingly. Proceed at restricted speed. What would we do without Hank? Okay. At least the switches seem to be set correctly. We're going left here. Again, I think we should not see this indicator here when we are facing the points. This is a special version of the WN2 signal that we should only see if we look at the switch from the Herzstück, from the opposite end. This switch is set to straight. Again, this combination of WN1 and the WN2 with the sickle. According from what I have read, this should not happen on the same switch indicator. But we will get to this later on the presentation. Now let's see that we get coupled to our 6 to 8. Okay, we stopped because it's a passenger vehicle. I heard that it is difficult to smoothly brake a train composed of cars braking partly with shoes and discs. I guess that is so. Since I have never braked a train in real life, I would not know how that feels. For me, it would probably be extremely difficult to brake a train at all, let alone smoothly. So Hank, what's the distance? We're there. Okay. All good. Then couple up, please. Now you can... Now you really can come back to the loco. Too late, yes. Okay, now we can go to Bad Vilbel. So that is the rest of the track with our funny formation. A 365, then 6 ES cars, I think they are, with Sugar Beets, and then a 628, 928. Well, even if this is fictitious and not realistic, I think it is a funny scenario anyway. And it is nice that they do some out-of-the-box stuff like this. But they might want to inform people that this is not real. And this is not really happening. So they can relax. Again, when starting this train, careful not to rev your prime mover higher than 1200, 1300. Well, realistic, it is possible. What I said, in the way they're doing it, it is really, really difficult and could be done a lot easier. Okay. At least now our signal is showing HP1. And we are not a shunting service anymore. We got our Zugfahrt permission and can pass the end of shunt sign. But I really want to know what made my game so laggy today. What did I do? Get it at speed. So let's see what's happened when we're overdoing it. Let's say I'm putting the throttle to full power. Engine is revving. So far so good. And now we are losing power. Do you know what that is, Ronnie? Is that wheel slips? Is that some sort of protection program in the engine that revved it down at this point? Is it the wheel slip protection mechanism that, like here again, we're overdoing it, the engine loses rotations per minute. It's probably just swapping gears, I'd say. Swapping gears in the hydrodynamic transmission. I think they have just maybe they are going from the hydrodynamic coupling to, you know, from the converter, from the torque converter to the dynamic coupling. Does that happen that late? Maybe that. It has a diesel hydraulic transmission and a mechanical transmission after it, with just one gear. But that might be a thing. Maybe we are actually running on the torque converter until this point, and then it is going to the mere coupling. Perhaps. But then this would be something that happens intentionally, and we can just go beyond that point. Electric trains for the win. Yeah. From what I've read, this hydrodynamic drive here has more or less two modes of operation. The first is a torque converter for getting the train up to speed, where you get high torque and low rotations, and at a certain point it switches to a mere hydrodynamic coupling, where the torque is not converted anymore, so you just run through the gearbox more or less. Well, I have to investigate that a bit. Maybe that is the explanation for that. This time I actually slowed down a bit, approaching the main signal after the isolated NE2. But I can see that it is showing HP1. Looks like I overdid it with my slowing down. Yeah, I stalled the train. What did I say in the beginning? I really enjoy driving this manually lapping brake. Slowing to 0, yeah. Unfortunately, I forgot or did not manage to get back into lap. So I applied more and more and more and more brake force. Zero is speed 2. That's what your teacher said, CD radar. Well, it is speed 2, but it does not get you anywhere. But now I can see what happens with our transmission here. What actually happens when this loss of rotations per minute takes place? Do we lose speed or don't we? It's revving up, revving up, revving up. Good thing we can see the exit signal from here, because you never get a distance signal in front of those exit signals. I shouldn't lose speed, but it takes longer. I think it actually... Actually, we're accelerating faster. We can't really see it because of that stupid 1000 kilometers per hour part. But my feeling is that we're accelerating faster now. So maybe this is the transition from the torque converter to the coupling. But now it does it again. We can't do it twice. Now we're accelerating with lower rotations pretty fast. So this seems to be... It's probably intentional then. Well, as I announced earlier, I wanted to make a video about hydrodynamic transmission anyway. So maybe I can find out more about this until then. I know that there are hydrodynamic transmissions that have this kind of transmissions like 3 or 4 times. But I thought I read that on this locomotive it only can happen once. We are accelerating harder with lower rotations, so something must have changed in the transmission here. Well, so there's actually no problem with putting the throttle to max then. It works. But before running our train home and before entering the 1000 kilometers per hour part, I wanted to finish my presentation for today. And as was requested in one of the comment sections in one of my videos, talk about signals concerned with shunting. The real shunting signals, I cannot talk about them because they are not in the game, but some signals we can look at that are protection signals and signals associated with protecting the line in areas where sidings connect and stuff like this. Let's imagine this is our line that is running through the landscape, and here is a little station that has a second line so that trains can pass or overtake. There is a platform, there's another platform, and here is a siding that connects to the main line. And here is another, well, part of the siding where you can put a train. So at the end, maybe here is a buffer block. And what signs can we put on this buffer block to signal to the driver that he is not allowed to proceed past the buffer block? Always reminding on Luzern-Sursee, where ETCS gave us with its in-cab signaling a movement authority to pass the buffer block with 40, what is obviously not a good idea to do. In the world of semaphore signals, if you see this, an SH0, you are not to pass the buffer block at all. Makes sense. You might have gotten this idea by yourself, but this is the order not to pass the buffer block. Except for this SH1, that at buffer block is typically just a sign that cannot be switched. You can also get this sign. It is called an SH2, a red rectangular sign with a white border. That can be used as an Abschlusssignal, an end of track signal, and fixed to the buffer block. It can also be put up at the end of the track, even if there is not a buffer block. It tells you to not proceed past this point. At night it can have a red lamp, or it can only have the red lamp. I've seen that on some sidings as well. There is only the red lamp then. You can also, as an attendant, put this sign somewhere in the track, and it has the same meaning. You are not allowed to proceed this point. You can see this in the DLC at a couple of times. They have this this stick where you can fix it to a rail, and then it is not an end of track signal, but a Wärterhaltescheibe, what can be translated attendant stopboard. Was about to say, but you're prepared. All right, nice to hear. The SH0 can also be used on a signal that can actually be switched, and here in this connection it would be a Sperrisignal that locks the siding and does not allow trains to come from the siding to run into the main line. This is all part of, I think, Flankenschutz, flank protection, so that if you're a train running on the main line, there is not a second train coming from the siding across the same switch and running into your flank. SH0 prevents you from passing it going out. If the signaler wants to let you pass, then he will switch it to SH1 on a semaphore signal, and we have seen this at the beginning of the stream. From the back, those signals look like this. If it is showing SH1, you can have one white disc. If it is showing SH0, then it shows two white discs. It is not always necessarily so that they show this on the backside, but if they show anything on the backside, then they show those aspects, so that you know when you're coming from the other direction what this signal is showing to the opposite direction. Those are the semaphore signals, the Formsignale. If you're using light signals, there is an SH1 equivalent for light signals, those two white lights in ascending order from left to right. So not confuse this, those are white discs here on the back, these are white lights. and SH1 also, but for some reason that I have not been able to determine, there is no equivalent for an SH0 in the world of light signals, but you would use an HP0 signal here. The two red lamps horizontally preventing you from passing this signal and not letting you out of the siding. So these signals can be mounted to the ground. In some situation it is required to put them on a stick so that you can see them from afar. And you can read it in the directives that in some situations you need to have them on a stick so that they can offer the protection for the main line. Those are the signals that you can see a lot. You also know that the SH1 can be shown at a main signal showing HP0 to allow a shunting service to pass the red signal, and you need to use the Befehl 40 program. What we have seen in the beginning of the stream also is that a Gleissperre, a track lock, what would be called in English a derail, I guess. This is this thing that causes the train to derail if it is active and the train tries to pass it, to prevent more harm. Also depends if it is high or low mounted regarding the form signal. What do you mean with that? Also depends if it is high or low mounted regarding the form signal. Does it have a different meaning if it is mounted high or low? We will wait for this answer and maybe get this. I will get back to my derail here, the track lock. It also comes with a signal. If it is activated, if it is in a position that would derail the train, you can get the SH0 at this point, telling you not to pass the derail, obviously. If it is open, if it is abgelegt, the Gleissperre, so that you don't derail, then it should, according to the rule, show this signal, vertically arranged bar in this white circle, and this would be an WN7 signal. It is actually in the section about the switch indicators, WN, Weichensignale, showing that the derail is open. But in the rules I have read, at least, it is also okay still to show SH1 here if the Gleissperre is not activated. And I think since the derail causes the train to derail no matter from what direction it comes, it should show WN7 and SH0 in both directions. In the game you find the combination SH0 or SH1, and then on the other end those here, the back sides for the SH1 and the SH0. I don't think that this makes sense for the Gleissperre, for the derail, and I think the Gleissperrensignale that I have seen from looking out of the window when I was going on a train, they actually have it on both sides. Open, closed. But maybe I'm wrong there, so I can't... I see. Ronnie says the form signal SH1 can be confused if it is low mounted. Okay. Well, this is the derail thing. We have seen that there are animated derails in this DLC, but not all of them are animated, unfortunately. There is one short preparation service in the journey for the Niddertalbahn where you actually pass active derail with your 628 without getting derailed, because it is not animated at this point. You can see in the map view that there is a signal at this point that turns to green, but you're just running over the active derail there. You need a permission from the signaler as well. Via familiy is enough. I see. Okay, so you don't need a written order to pass it then. but it is okay if he tells you on radio. Next thing that protects the track, maybe off topic, but in Munich DLC, when departing from Munich Hauptbahnhof, there is this SH1 shunting signal with red lights. That is not correct, is it? I think that is actually not correct. You can see that in the Schnellfahrstrecke Köln-Aachen as well. There are some services starting in Köln Hauptbahnhof that let you start as a train at HP0 with an SH1. Not departing as a Zugfahrt, yeah. But we have this in the Schnellfahrstrecke Köln when you're starting at the rightmost track in Köln, I think, or at some point. And if you say so, that it is in München Hauptbahnhof as well. Well, but this is an old, I think this has been reported 3 or 4 years ago already. Well, the game is not at all. What signal should be there instead? Just a green light, I think. Or an HP2 or whatever. But not a red light with the SH1. Because that only allows you to pass as a shunting service and not as a line service. And then you need to be wary that this track is actually occupied. And if you're only a shunting service, then you cannot pass this sign here, Halt für Rangierfahrten, end of shunting limit. This is just like a red signal if you are only a shunting service. It is called an RA10, Rangierhalttafel, limit of shunt board. And it typically comes on both sides of the station area. So within that, you can run around as a shunting service according to the signals, obviously. But if you want to pass this sign, you need a track warrant, usually HP2 regarding Munich, literally anything except that. Okay. It is so nice to have real train drivers discussing this stuff on my stream. What we also have in this context is the RA12, the Grenzzeichen, the limit of foul marker. This marks the maximum distance that the train needs to keep from a switch so that it does not pose a danger for a train running on the other line. This does not mean that the train is necessarily allowed to go that far, but if it is beyond that point, then the other train cannot pass. This signal here, we have talked about it already. It is the EL6. This stops all vehicles with raised pantographs. There can be exceptions on some lines, but typically if you have a vehicle that runs on electricity and you have your pantograph up, then you can't pass this sign. So typically you find those signs on diverging tracks where there is no overhead catenary, or, well, it works according to the rules also for third rail, but we don't have a lot of third rail in Germany. Don't know, maybe on some S-Bahnen perhaps, and on metro, but not really on long distance train services. At least I've never seen it. Those signs can come with arrows if there is a junction and it only applies for one direction. This will be the straight ahead. This is to the right, this is to the left. And also, if it applies to both directions, you can see an arrow like this, or you can have them stacked if they are coming in a short succession, or look like this if it is to the right and straight ahead, but not to the left. And CD Radar says, I tested with off-the-rail scenario, and you can totally run with ICE or Niddertalbahn with pan up. Yes, but then you have to explain how the pantograph magically gets its electricity, maybe from the thunderstorms. Then, well, that is that. Switch indicators. I wanted to talk about switch indicators. Switches, we have looked at them. The most simple switches are like this. Typically, switches have one way that goes through and one that is diverging, and those are the switches that everyone knows from model railways. One line is straight and the other one goes out in the curve and then ends up in a track that goes parallel to the first one. Those are called einfache Weiche in the rules, simple switch. And we have talked about this at the beginning of the stream. You can look on at switches from two ends typically. This would be from top to bottom across the frog, the Herzstück, or from bottom to top in my presentation here, facing the points, facing the Weichenspitze. And obviously it can make a difference from what direction you're looking at the switch. If you're coming from bottom to top, you're looking at the points, then you need to know whether you're going left or whether you are going straight, or on this end whether you're going right or going straight. If you're coming from the other end, you don't have a lot of choice because you will always end up in this here. But yeah, on some switches you need to know if you can safely pass them actually or not. Other switches are like this. They are in a curve, so the main path, the through path, is curved and the other one is curving away from the curve. If the diverging path is on the inside of the curve, being curved more than the through path, then you would call it an inner curved switch, an Innenbogenweiche. That also can happen to the right, obviously. And if the through path is actually the more curved path and the diverging path goes off on the outside of the curve in a less curved way, then you would call it an outer curved switch, an Außenbogenweiche. And why is that important? Because the rule say that you can get different indicators on an Innenbogenweiche and on an Außenbogenweiche. Let's go through the possible settings here. If you're on a simple switch and you're running through, then typically the normal position of the switch would be running through. You get this indication here. It is called an WN1 and it tells you you're going straight ahead on this switch. If you're coming from the other direction, you would also get the WN1 on a simple switch, telling you you're going straight ahead. The switch is set to the through position. On the inner curved switch, you would get exactly the same indicators here. WN, you are going straight. So the lesser curved way here on the inner curved switch counts as the straight through path. And the same if you are coming across the Herzstück, across the frog, not facing the points, you would also get those indications. It is different on an outer curve switch here, if I read the rules correctly. Even though you are going on the main path here, you would get an WN2 indication that tells you you are diverging. If you are going on one that is curved to the left, you will get an indication to the left. If you are going on one that is curved to the right, you will get an indication that you're going to the right. That is the WN2 signal. And if you're coming in from the other end, it can look like this, more like an arrow, but it does not necessarily need to look like an arrow. It can also be this rectangular switched into 45 degrees. From the other end, you would get this. You would get a white circle with a black sickle on one end. And the black sickle is on that end that you are coming in. So if you have the sickle on the right coming from top to bottom, then you know you are on the right part and that there is a part, another track to your left that is converging with you at this switch, and the switch is set to your path. This is also an WN2 signal, but you find it in section 6 of the WN2 signal description in the rules. If you want to read it up, I hope I picked up the right module. It is 0801. So this is for the normal position. You can see simple switch, inner curved switch would always give you the WN1 in the normal position. On the outer curved switch, you will have all WN2 signals. If you're coming facing the points, you get the diverging aspect, and if you're coming in not facing the points, then you would get the white circle with the sickle showing you on which side you are on. Let's have a look on the reverse position. On the simple switch, this would be the position that switches you off, that diverges you from the through track. Obviously here the WN1 does not make sense. You would get from this direction coming from bottom to top the WN2 with a diverging thing, and coming in from the other end you would, according to the rules as I read them, as I understand them, not get this aspect, but you would get a white circle, again a WN2, but the one that are described in section 5 of the signal description to WN2, so that you actually know I am coming in through a switch not facing the points. In the game, I have to admit, it is different. You will always get this part, this diverging aspect from the WN2, and never this circle. Whether this is correct for the period of time or for the Niddertalbahn secondary line, obviously I can't say. According to the rules that I can find, that I can read, you should get, when you're coming through the headstück facing the frog, not facing the points, you should get this white circle on your signal indicator. And how is it done that the signal indicator can show all those different aspects? Obviously you have like a little cube sitting here next to the switch, and it has 4 sides, and on either of those 4 sides there is a different aspect. And if you turn this cube by 90 degrees while throwing the switch, then it can either show this part when you're coming from bottom to top, and this at the same time when you're coming from top to bottom, or turn it by 90 degrees and it will show the WN1 for both directions. And this works with all the switch indicators. You always have this box with the 4 sides, and it is always showing 2 sides to the both directions. Let's take it out again. So what happens on our Innenbogenweiche, the inner curved switch? It is exactly the same. If you are set to the reverse position and coming facing the points, you should get those diverging signals, and if you're coming in not facing the points, you should get the WN2 with the white circle coming in, showing you that you are coming in out of the non-through line. Or again, Innenbogenweiche, simple switch, same signs. And for the Außenbogenweiche, it is still WN2s, but now obviously with the different indication. So now it gives you the right one when you're coming from bottom to top. On this one that is curved to the left, so that on the outer curved switch you always have an indication whether you're going left or right on the diverging route. When you're coming in, you get again those sickle signs, but now obviously since you're coming on the other path, it will be on the other side here. At least this is what I can read out of the rules, and I think this is how it should be. In the game, you never get those full white circles. You get the bar instead, that is tilted by 45 degrees. And on some switches that might not necessarily be Außenbogenweichen, you see this sickled sign mixed with the WN1. We have seen that when we were doing the shunting to get our broken down 6 to 8 coupled again. So you either get the straight bar WN1 or the sickled WN2. What I don't think is according to the rules that I have read, but if you know more about this, please put me wise in the comments and let me know. Last slide. There are some switches that we have in this DLC that are more complex, that are let out in an X fashion. So those are called doppelte Kreuzungsweiche or Kreuzungsweiche, double slip switch or single slip switch. And why is it called a Kreuzungsweiche? Because it is a crossing. Obviously, two lines are crossing, and the interesting thing is that the trains can not only run across the crossing, but they can switch at the crossing to the other direction. So a train can run this direction straight through, and then you will have a switch indicator telling you this, WN3. If it is set to this, it is WN4. If it is actually set to this, the train from the left is going to the left, it is set to this. If the train from the right is going to the right, it is set to this. This makes it a doppelte Kreuzungsweiche, a double switch, a double slip switch, because both these two settings are possible. If only one of those settings is possible, then it is a einfache Kreuzungsweiche, a single slip switch. So those are 4 different signal aspects, but I think this is super intuitive. You can see it on some of the stations here in the Niddertalbahn DLC. What happens if you get switch indicators that are orange, that are not black but orange? We don't have that in the DLC, but nevertheless I wanted to introduce it here. This is what is called a Rückfallweiche, or in English a spring switch. What does that mean? Typically a switch is set to a certain position, and if you're running through it and coming from the direction that the switch is not set to, then typically you set the points to the direction that you are running over the switch, if you're not derailing, that is. And then the switch stays in that position. Then the switch is driven open, aufgefahren. And but there are some switches that go back into the position they were set before. Even when you're running through it, coming from the opposite direction, the points will snap back because they are driven by a spring into the position that they were before. And this is obviously something that can be quite dangerous, because if you are reversing on the switch, what you never should do, then you can have some of your cars go in one direction and the other cars go in a different direction. Or even if you have slack in your train, then the cars can move back forward or backwards a little. So that can cause a lot of trouble on spring switch. So you need to be warned about this. And I think they don't really exist anymore, only on very small railroads, I guess. I've never seen one in real life, and you can find a handful of pictures in the internet. But they are in the rules, and they have special signals that are actually announcing them, that look like this. Any 12, they are announced by this announcement board, and then there comes a special supervision signal that we know a bit from the level crossings. If the white light is on, you can pass it. If no light is on, it is not safe to pass the Rückfallweiche, and then you need to stop, and there is a special procedure let out in the rules what you need to do. So I don't want to dwell too long on those signals, but I just wanted to introduce them here, because it is interesting what there is in the rules and in the world of railroading. It is interesting that they have 2 white lamps, and they are only using one of them to distinguish between those 2 types of signals. I think this is an historical thing, because in the eastern part of Germany there used to be a pair of signals, I think it was called SO18A and B, that served the same function, but they had slightly different aspects. I think the signal that allowed you to pass the spring switch had both lights on, and the signal that did not allow you to pass it had the right light on, and the other one was off. And this is probably something that causes problems with the fail-safe idea. So you can read in the preface of the directive that I have read that the SO18 signals needed to be replaced by those NE13A and NE13B. If anyone knows more about the history of those SO18 signals and why we have two lamps and we only need one for them to work in our context that we have now, please put us wise, let us know. Last thing, you might have seen it in the game, they are actually painted. There are those round weights on the switch mechanisms for the switches, and they are colored, and they tell you what those switches do and what they are. A spring switch like this will have, according to the normal rules, a painting that is yellow on top and black on the bottom. If you see a switch like this that is white on the top and black on the bottom, then it tells you that this is a switch that has, by definition, a certain default setting that it needs to be set back after passing it typically. If it is one with a yellow weight, and the switches that we have looked at in the DLC, they all have yellow weights so far, they don't have a default setting, so they can be just left in the setting that you ran over it and someone will take care of it when they get there. The ones with a default setting can have a W that tells you you are not supposed to switch this switch, to throw this switch, unless you have the clearance from the attendant. And then there are some, at least in the rules, I've never seen them in real life or even pictures of it. This tells you that this switch does not have a point lock, no Spitzenverschluss. Typically, if you throw a switch, then the points are held in place by a certain mechanism that prevents it from moving away from the rail, so that a train passing it does not derail at this point. And there are some switches that don't have a mechanism like this, and this painting on the weight warns you about this. Interesting thing, you can find it in the game. This is why I try to explain it. You don't find all of those, but at least the yellow ones I've seen, and I think sometimes you can find the black and white one, the one with the default setting. I have to warn you that in Eastern Germany those paintings can be slightly different, but I don't want to bore you with that. That is the end of the presentation for today. Thank you for watching the presentation with me. See the radar, you asked to explain every signal and every sign that is in the DLC, and I tried my best to do that. If you come upon one signal or sign or indication that I did not explain, please tell me so that we can fix this. This was actually BU0, but obviously not meant as a BU0 because there was no 1000 Hertz magnet. Maybe it is there to warn us that we are approaching the Langsamfahrstelle. Past Kronau, we have to slow down to 30. Again, I overbraked my train. I always undervalue the time it takes for the brake pipe to recover and for the cylinders to clear. Yeah, was a long stream today, but now we're coming to the end. Next station is Bad Vilbel already. I won't talk a third time about this Langsamfahrstelle here past Chrono. If you want to know more about the signs that are put up there, watch last week's video about the level crossing signs. Yeah, this is actually intentional, interesting. We are still accelerating even though the rotations dropped. AJ, what's with you? Are you still awake? Haven't heard anything from you in a while. Well, probably fell asleep. Accelerating a bit for the last part. Soon we will get our VR2 warning us about the incoming speed reduction to 40. And then we will run into Bad Vilbel station. One of the last whistle boards. Have you heard about French safety system called Matra? No, I haven't. Is that a new thing or an old thing? In French systems I only know the TVM, the KVP, the Crocodile. But Matra I have not heard. By the way, CD Radar, I've looked into the file that you linked me, and I am impressed. The Czech railway system has so many interesting signal aspects. Google Translate was actually a bit lost with translating the Czech, so that requires more investigation. So, we are 0. We have to expect. On the right you could see an SH1, by the way. But now we have to expect a red light at the next signal. By the way, did you see, we just passed the signal and HP2 ordering us to slow down to 40, and the speed line on the pause screen is not showing that. It is still showing track speed of 60. I think this is a change with the last update. They took back those changes. Ah, that's great. If you want to explain something more, you can reach me on Discord. With your name, CD Radar? Maybe you can drop me your those numbers that come after the hashtag on Discord, so that I can take you there. Or do you happen to be on my server? Ah, then I can DM you there. Great. Ah yeah, obviously I invited you a couple of weeks ago. Perfect. The red light, by the way, is this little signal on the right that we're just approaching right now. Again, the stop marker is very close to this signal. Make sure not to run it. Otherwise you spat out at the very end of the scenario. Finally, Hank, you can uncouple the 628 here and we reverse into a siding afterwards. Our shift will end here. So Hank, please uncouple the 628. That annoying thing. Then you can come back on the locomotive, I think. And then I can show you to Prague's meteo regulations and think, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, signal switched, you can see, to SH1. Again, we are approaching a red signal, so I think we've never run so many red signals as in this scenario. Some with written order, some without. And again, why are we allowed to pass this red signal? Because it is showing SH1 along with it. If I read the rules correctly, the second red light should be off if it shows SH1 on the HP 0. But nevertheless, oh, we have gotten an achievement. Please take your achievement out of the way. I need to know. Befehlstaste. So that the 2000 Hertz magnet does not stop us. This little signal is not for us, it is on the left side, it belongs to the track on our left, or to our left. CD Radar says, but I think Czech signals are in some way similar to German KS. Is that it? If it is so, I have not been able to confirm that. I've seen a lot of signals that reminded me of HL signals that we had in Eastern Germany. But even more. But maybe there is more than one system mixed together in this file that you sent me, and I have not been able to find out what signals belong to which system. Because I don't understand the jack. So, now we're going back again. Hank, I need you at the end, because we have one more coupling to do. Go back to your Sugar Beets. Aha. This little signal is showing SH1. We are actually allowed to pass. Then let's do this. It's an exceptionally long sprint. So there, I should forget the signals that look like the HL signals. So they don't really exist in real life anymore. Yeah, those two bars in red and green. Sometimes with a number, sometimes not with a number. Here you can see one of those counterweights in yellow, telling us this is a switch that does not have a default setting. Yes, yes. Yeah, maybe there are a lot of signals in the rules that are obsolete or obsolescent. But there are many aspects in your rules. Switch indicator, straight ahead. No default setting switch. You can see one of these Grenzzeichen. RA12 was it? Something like that. Here we can see we are turning to the left on this switch. It's a simple switch, so we're getting the normal version of the WN2. But I still find this less confusing than Americans. Well, American signaling is a patchwork. Are we actually going to the correct... Yeah, we are going in the correct direction. Maybe we can speed up a bit here, since we found our correct siding. Then we can see far ahead. To the right you can see one of those double slip switches and the indicators to it. Oh, we don't have to couple here. We just put the cars here. Okay. A beautiful map it is. It is totally beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Okay. We did it. Magnificent. This was an unconventional formation to deal with, but you have done well. Get some rest, driver, from all those red signals that we have run today. Again, after all, rest. That was this scenario, and this was the stream today. You too, Hank. Yeah. Hank can rest. He can have a sleep in the Sugar Beets, or wherever he prefers. Now Hank and me, we will go to the bar now, I think, and call it a day. Thank you for staying with me for this exceptionally long stream. I hope it was not too boring, all those indicators, but I hope I have lived up to my promise and explained every single sign and signal that is in this DLC in those 3 streams that we did. Thank you, CD Radar, for your input. Thank you, Ronnie, if you're still here. If not, then anyway, thank you very much. Thanks, AJ, for moderating the stream before you fell asleep, obviously. But that's okay. It was a long one, and yeah, it takes some determination to enjoy this. I'm happy that they made this scenario. I share you view, CD Radar, that it is a lot of fun to drive. So thanks TSG for that. Have a good time. AJ is awake. Thanks for the stream. Great. Thank you for moderating. Have a good time. Take care, and maybe see you next week.